I'm Sarah Holbrook. I'm here with the Minds of Mountain Film and sitting with my dear friend John Hockenberry from Brooklyn. Thank you for coming to Telluride. What brings you out to Mountain Film?
Well, the symposium needed a moderator, and David asked me if the subject interested me, and of course it did. And I just finished a film for Frontline on climate change politics, and it really hit a chord, and I think was just the kind of thing that this audience would be really interested in. And typically David loaded up this symposium like a graduate level course in everything, and threw me into the middle of it, and that's the kind of thing I love. So,
yeah, they were great presenters, weren't they?
It was good stuff.
Who was like the short list of your top three? I know it's hard to choose, it's like choosing your favorite child, but what were you blown away by yesterday?
Well, I think what makes this whole event unique is the collective power of people who basically agree, but who all want to go to the next step on some level. There's consensus on what reality is, but there's disagreement on how do we make a new reality. And so what you get are a kind of clamoring voice of, we could try this, this could work, this could work.
And
hey,
we should back up and say this is for climate solutions. That's
right,
the symposium.
climate solutions.
Yeah.
That's exactly. I mean, and the film that I did, Climate of Doubt, is all about sowing doubt in the political system. And there's not a lot of doubt here, but what there is a hunger and a yearning for collective action. And I think that makes the audience as interesting a character as the people on stage. But you have, I think, scientific solutions like Daniel Nocera talking about using photosynthesis or artificial photosynthesis to marshal the sun's energy, but doing it in a very decentralized way, not big photovoltaics, but small, fuel cell kinds of things that can be used to target the 3 billion people who have no access to the energy grid and whose energy options are typically extremely polluting, burning of wood, burning of coal. And so if you can attack that, not only do you get the carbon benefit of reducing the 3 billion, in that 99%, let's just say 10% at the bottom kind of thing, getting to be like 40% at the bottom. Not only do you reduce that, but you also prove the viability of a fundamentally more decentralized model for energy distribution, and that has benefits at the high end in the industrialized world. And that dovetailed right into what David Sassoon's story was about how much we can learn from Germany, who's used some of those techniques to really pull sustainable energy into the collective consensus within the German government. And he described the German government as a functioning democracy, something that we wouldn't talk about too much in the 20th century, but taking advice from Germans is actually appropriate in the 21st century.
Surprise.
And maybe we should listen to them.
Yeah, it's kind of a crazy new world, isn't it? David Holbrook is my husband. He runs Mountain Film, and he comes home a lot kind of feeling heavy, the weight of the world on his shoulders, wondering what the next climate solution is. But yesterday, it felt like there was a lot of hope in the room. Do you agree?
Yes, I do, but I think there is no one solution, and I'm very leery of the solution model that Americans yearn for, a solution, that there's a sort of Jobs and Wozniak team in a garage somewhere that's going to figure out, fusion or cold fusion or anything like that. And I think Daniel Nocera said it very, very well, that the paradigm shift is not going to come in a gadget. It's going to be in the penetration of a gadget and a state of mind to change our expectations about where energy comes from. The most destabilizing element in the energy system right now is that people think it comes out of the wall. And that is a brilliant innovation of Edison's that basically transformed the consumer culture of America in the 1800s and defined the 1900s. But we can't have that now. Energy has to have flavors. It has to have, you have to be able to smell when you're using solar energy versus when you're using carbon. And I think we're getting to a point now where science is going to allow us to have those gradations, and that suddenly you're going to see someone who's like, oh, God, you smell like you've been burning carbon all day. Is that right? You know, I think we're getting to that point where the modalities of energy use are going to be more conspicuous, and then that's going to create a different conversation about why didn't you use renewables today, kind
It's
of
like
thing.
when we were kids and we used to brush our teeth, and then they would give you those tablets to chew, and then you could see all the plaque that was still left on your teeth. It's kind of like that, you know, like a carbon identifier all over your body.
See,
somehow.
my favorite is the stuff they put in the pools to figure out.
No.
Yeah.
That's not.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist, really, does it?
Oh yeah.
Really?
Sure. It's
my science
it's
teacher.
a simple chemical reaction.
You know what it would be showing? Do we need to tell our
Well,
audience?
basically, if you inject urea
Thank you for taking it up a notch.
into a public pool,
It would show a different
there's
color.
a very simple chemical you can put in there that delivers a marker for the person who does that. But I
right.
think
But applying that to today's standards with
it's
regard
about
to
markers.
energy.
It's about markers. It's not about necessarily putting the things on your teeth or embarrassing people in public pools, but it is just about knowing where the energy comes from and who's using what energy and why.
Yeah, we just had Luis Sohoyos here, and he's the director of The Cove, but he's working on a new film mainly about oceans and acidification, but he also is obviously very interested in carbon, and he has a new camera that shows carbon coming out of whatever source it is. You know, come out of a lot of it comes out of my mouth, but also, you know, cars' tailpipes and power plants and even methane from cows it can show. And it's this crazy thing that you see on camera, and you cannot believe what your naked eye is not seeing, and these cameras now show it. So I suppose along those same lines, you might be able to somehow figure out where your energy is coming from.
Well, however it's done, the fact that energy is invisible is really keeping us from having a rational conversation. It allows the climate deniers, the doubters in our film, to really be able to say to people who don't know the science, hey, you know, they're pulling the wool over your eyes. Look around you. Things are fine.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about climate doubt. I wrote down a quote. One of them said, one of the skeptics, and you found so many, it was terrifying. So I guess those weren't the only ones in the world. There's many, many more, and you just found a bunch of really articulate ones. But one of them said that perhaps the right response is to have the courage to do nothing.
Yeah, I think that's, I believe that was Lord Monckton, but
It could have been any of them.
I think the ability of the political elites to use fear to basically say to people who are fearful out of ignorance that their ignorance is in fact a form of intelligence, and that their worry about change is a kind of skepticism that elevates them above. The other people, they've bought into a conspiracy. They're being led astray. They're being led down the garden path. And if the climate change advocates, the environmental movement, call it what you will, if they don't have a counter for that, if their only answer is to basically say, well, that's ridiculous, you know, it's not going to work. They're going to win, and that's what's happened here. And they won.
Yeah.
They won in a big way. I mean, they bought 5 years, and it took Hurricane Sandy to re-inject this into the conversation. Yeah. And do we really want a Force 4 or a Category 5 hurricane to be the argument? On the one side, it's this little band of funded political zealots versus a Force 5 hurricane. Can't there be some other rational argument other than simply the arrogance of, well, we're right? Okay, the science says we're right. It's got to be more than that to work in American political democracy. So I was a little enraged by, I certainly didn't admire their tactics and their old tactics in American politics, but I was enraged by the inability of the Al Gores of the world to really get in. And I think, you know, McKibben has it right. Okay, if we don't win there, we're going over here. If we don't win on the White House agenda, then we will get into the divestment issue. If we can bring churches on and make them environmental stewards, we will do that. We're going to build. There's a way of building at every level, and we just keep building. And I think he's the smartest one in the room here.
Yeah, he's even if he was only on Skype, but he was pretty smart in that room. Yeah. I was explaining to my kids divestment because I was in college when we were divesting from South Africa,
Sure.
which made a big difference
Yeah.
with regard to apartheid. And I wondered, what do you think about the role of divestment moving the conversation forward?
Well, remembering the divestment movement in South Africa, there was the argument about, well, no, we need to be engaged, constructively engaged with the South African government. That's how we're going to have influence. And the divestment community said, no, if you're bought in to the economic interests in South Africa that support apartheid, you are supporting apartheid. You may have some interesting conversations over dinner with them. You may cause them to pass the emergency don't flog more than a dozen black people in a week, law kind of thing. But you're
Was
never,
that really a law that was on the books?
But these are the kinds of things. I mean, the whole township mechanism and
right.
how that was a convoluted attempt to do gymnastics around reality and was not sustainable. You could perpetuate that forever on a constructive engagement policy. But divestment, you suddenly bring things to a point where the powers that are endorsing apartheid are cornered.
Yeah.
And when you're cornered, then you change,
Yeah.
and that's what happened. It's a much bigger scale dealing with the fossil fuel industry globally. And once you get done with Exxon, you have to deal with the Saudis. Because the Exxons are certainly very, very big, but they're not the only players.
Yeah, sure. Does this gathering Mountain Film, does it give you hope? Does it give you inspiration?
What gives me hope is that there is a sophisticated conversation. I don't yearn for a single solution. What I do yearn for is that the consensus brings us to a variety of solutions. Ultimately, the solution is people agree to take action. That's how it worked in Germany. That's how it's going to work in communities that are really threatened around the world. That's how it's going to work in the city of New York in dealing with Sandy.
Yeah.
And it's not about a gadget or a technology. It is really about taking local efforts to deal with a reality of climate change that they can see and scaling those up nationally and then globally. And I think that conversation is very active and exciting here.
Here, right, in Mountain Film.
Yeah.
Anything I haven't asked that you want to talk about?
Well, the great thing about the symposium is that it was like a great long radio program for me, where you take individual data points of people's expertise and inflate it into a very big idea. And I think that's what's very, very collectively exciting. This is what we do all the time on The Takeaway. I mean, the idea of The Takeaway is to take the facts of the news and empower people to really think about them in a provocative way, not to get talked to by MSNBC about what's the lefty position, or to be preached to by Chris Matthews or Al Sharpton, or to be yelled at and excoriated by Bill O'Reilly or Sean Hannity. What we're more interested in is like, wow, we've got a good amount of information here. Where can we take this?
Yeah, it's such a great title. I mean, you love having a takeaway at the end of whatever it is that you're listening to. You can take it to your book club, you could take it to dinner, you could take it to the water cooler at work. I mean, it's such a gift to the people who are consuming it.
Well, we do envision that, you overhear us and then you take it into a conversation that you will have later in the day. That said, takeaway over in London is Indian food in a box that you take home.
If you had one takeaway from Mountain Film and it was not the Indian food in a box type, what would your takeaway be from Mountain Film?
Interesting. I would say it's the idea. It's the idea that the debate between fighting over remediation versus adaptation to climate change is coming to an end, and that we're seeing the merging of those two as a form of adaptation. And that's a much more powerful force than either the adapters or the fighters. And I think that's what you're seeing here, and that's my takeaway.
All right, I'll take it. Hey, thanks so much, John.
Thanks.